more stuff. So, first of all, let me just say, I'm not an educator. But the cool thing about this room is that you guys are all in economic development. And it's something that I learned in the years that I've spent in economic development. I've spent about close to 20 years in economic development. I started in the city of Harlingen. And before we get into this, let me tell you how I got into economic development, because I think most folks in the economic development world don't just go to school and say, I'm going to be an EDC director, I'm going to be an EDC. It just happens that they end up in EDC. And so I was born and raised in Brownsville, moved to Austin, went to college in Austin, moved to DC, worked in DC, came to the Valley and with an economics degree, and everybody in the Valley thought that I could do accounting because I had an economics degree. And I hate accounting. So I couldn't do it, but it was a job. So I get hired at an accounting firm, and I'm at a point where I'm getting my MBA, and I really do just hate my job as an accountant. I mean, it is a pain every day having to get up, go to my job. And so one day I get this idea that I'm going to reach out to folks that do things that interest me. So I reached out to a bunch of folks. I started emailing these random people, very unsolicited emails. And one guy responds, and he says, have you thought about economic development? I had never heard that term in my life. And so I asked him, well, what is it? And he tells me, look, you have a background in economics. It has the word economic, right? So, you can do it. And it's funny the way things work out, because the accounting firm that I was working for, because I was not a CPA, I wasn't allowed to audit private corporations. I can audit nonprofits. So this is just crazy, but literally the following week, my boss tells me, hey, I need you to audit the Harlingen EDC. And when I saw Harlingen Economic Development, I thought, okay, well, this guy told me I need to get into economic development, so this was a way for me to get to learn about it. So I get to audit the Harlingen EDC, and after about a couple weeks of being in the EDC office, I realized that the office I'm using says EDC director, but there is no EDC director. So I started asking, where's the EDC director? And he says, well, he actually moved to Mission. He's the new EDC director in Mission, which later I become the EDC director for Mission 2. And so I said, hey, here's my resume. I've got an economics degree. It says economic, right? I can do this. Now, again, at this point, I didn't really know what economic development was all about. Now, mind you, just like many of you guys here that are born in either a small town or born in the Rio Grande Valley, when you graduate high school, you say, I want to get the hell out of here. I don't ever want to come back, right? And I came back. Not only that did I come back, but I get into a field that my job is to promote the one place that I never wanted to be a part of again, right? And so that, to me, was really kind of hard to grasp, because, again, I came back from DC. I was still wondering why I decided to come back. And in fact, the firm that I was working for moved me to Corpus, and being that close to the Valley, my parents just kind of sucked me to the Valley, and that's how I ended up coming back here. But now I'm stuck in a career, in a job that I'm supposed to promote and talk about recruiting people and companies to the region that I thought I hated. But the job taught me to appreciate everything that we have here in the Rio Grande Valley, to the point that I love the Rio Grande Valley. I mean, it is something that I live and breathe, and it's something that I love to talk about. And I can talk about this all day long. I'm kind of like Bubba Gump and Forrest Gump. You talk about shrimp, he can tell you all the different ways. I can talk about all those ways in economic development. But that's how I ended up at EDC. And so I want to talk about some topics that I think they're good starting points, they're good discussion points, and there's some takeaways that I think you guys will be able to kind of align with the things that you do. So economic development, and this is my definition. I'm sure somebody else has written it, so don't. If I plagiarize, then don't call on me. But it's a solutions-based approach by which we improve the economic well-being and the quality of life of a community. And I say we because all of us are involved in economic development, whether we know it or not. I mean, we are truly involved. Everything you guys are doing is economic development. The way economic development works basically is, well, the way EDCs work, right? They're tasked with recruiting companies. They're tasked with building a foundation that allows companies to grow, flourish, but ISDs though, right, train the same people that we're trying to recruit companies for. So you train them, EDCs have to employ them. Well, if we don't communicate, how can we do that, right? How can we do that? And so it's very important that we understand that it's a we approach. And so we got to work on this together. And that's why I put these four elements of economic development. It really does take the community, the elected officials, the government, and the business to all be working together. I know I'm going to say a lot of things you guys have probably already heard and you probably hear on a regular basis, but I just can't stress this enough, that economic development is a team effort, and it really is about all of us working together, because one of the things that I found throughout my career is that cities don't really compete with cities. Regions compete with regions. States compete with states. And so we have to have the density of qualified individuals, the density of industries in order to recruit more companies. And there's no right or wrong way to do economic development. It's just about finding solutions. And that's why I think it's so important that it becomes a solutions-based approach versus just, well, I'm going to teach or I'm going to recruit companies in hopes that something comes, right? The superintendent said it. We can't just hope. We actually have to do this. And that's why I think we got to look at it as a solution. So there's an author, and I had to write it down because I always mess up the title of the book. David Ostrich. He wrote a book called Everything in Its Place. And what he does is he looks at cities throughout the entire country, in fact, throughout the entire world, and he starts to compare the elements that make a strong region strong, growing, and these are the three elements that he identified. It's got a presence of a university, a strong healthcare presence, and a strong presence of government. Now, when you look at these things, you realize that we have that. We have RGV, TSCC, and TSC and SDC and all those. We have a strong presence of academic institutions, very strong. Healthcare. Healthcare is one of the fastest growing industries in the entire state and the country. And so we have that. We have the medical school, we have DHR, we have all the different hospitals that are out here, South Texas Health System. We've got a strong presence of healthcare. And then government. Government, most people don't see as an entity that, aside from the fact that we provide economic development, we're the ones out there recruiting, but government in many towns is the largest employer. School districts, counties, cities, largest employer. And so we have to work with government. If you look at any region of the state of Texas that we aspire to be, let's use Austin, right? Strong presence of government. You got the university, you got the Capitol, healthcare with a medical school that you got there, and then of course, with government and everything that's already there. So it meets those things. You look at Houston, you look at Dallas, you look at New York, Chicago, they have it, right? And those are the things that drive growth. Those are the things that cause metropolitan areas to grow. There's a study that was done by Michael Porter from Harvard University, and this is something I've been using for pretty much as long as I found this, which is maybe like 15 years ago. So it's an old study. But I love this because it's very easy to understand. And I think to me, it relates so much to the Rio Grande Valley. Because if you look at these stages, you can truly see that the valley has gone through these stages. The way I see the valley is that we're a startup entity, right? We may think that, when we compare ourselves to the bigger cities, we think we're failing, but we're not. You think about the medical school, right? We got a medical school, when the valley got together to get a medical school, we got it in such a short time frame when you compare it to how long it took UT Austin that's been around since 1886, right? So the fact that we still think like a startup, we're still a startup community. We're still not afraid to try and fail things. And the neat thing about these stages of development is again, if you look at the first stage, and I don't mean to lecture you guys, but I'll read this. Factor-driven stage, the first stage. The first stage is a factor-driven stage in which competitive advantage is based exclusively on endowments of labor and natural resources. The Valley was an ag community, right? That's what we were known for. We were an ag community. The second stage is an investment-driven stage. Efficiency in producing standards, products, services becomes the dominant source of competitive advantage. We became a manufacturing community. We started recruiting manufacturing companies. And of course, the last one is more for innovation, which is what we're going for now, right? Now we got the merger of the university, we got all these different things. Innovation is where we're heading, and that's why I think we're kind of like in the 2.5 range right now. And so it's really neat how this applies to the Valley. And now that I work for a bank, and you guys probably wonder why I'm at a bank now and doing economic development, but I have to remind myself of these stages, because now I get to visit all the cities throughout the state of Texas, and I get to work with them. And sometimes I'm working with cities that are in the third stage, in the innovation stage. You know, I was working with a city the other day that's in the first stage, right? So there's no right or wrong way to do economic development. The only thing is you got to understand that if you're here, you can get here. If you're here, you can get there. And as long as you keep trying, it'll help the community. So let me talk about preparing the bench. There's a company, and I see Jenny Cavazos over there, formerly with McAllen EDC, now with Pharr EDC. Janie, McAllen EDC, Mission EDC, we recruited a company called Royal Technologies. And Royal Technologies for me came at a time I had been hired to run Mission EDC. And Mission EDC had gone through what I call a divorce. The council and the EDC sued each other. The city sued the EDC, EDC sued the city. They had no money. The EDC had no money. Literally got rid of all the furniture, staff, nothing. And so I get hired to fix this entity with no money, no staff, no nothing, right? And so I had to do something that I had to do something, basically, right? I had to do something. I couldn't just walk into the entity and just leave it where it's at. There's a book called The Metropolitan Revolution, which I love. And it's written by Bruce Katz from the Brookings Institute. And he talks about getting back to basics, how communities need to get back to basics. And that is skills, manufacturing, supporting small business. You know, these are things that we have to do. And that's exactly what I ended up doing at Mission. Because I didn't have any money, I had to go door to door and visit with entities, visit with the local businesses that are in the city of Mission. Because I didn't have any money, I had to go visit with the chamber. Because I didn't have any money, I had to go visit with the school district. So I did all these things, right, that I had to get back to basics. And as this lawsuit continued, we finally got over, we had a little bit of money, and we had land in the industrial park. And we recruited a company called Royal Technologies. And Royal Technologies, they kind of challenged me to do something that I hadn't thought of and I had never really thought of. And the thing is that they said, hey, well, I need you to help me with my bench. I'm gonna hire 500 people, but I'm gonna keep hiring more people as time goes. And he said, what are you doing to prepare my bench? And I said, oh, well, I'll introduce you to the school district. And I'll introduce you to Region 1 and STC and all these things. And he says, no, Alex, you're not understanding what I'm asking you. What are you doing about preparing my bench? He says, all you're doing is setting up meetings. And he was right. That's all I was doing. I was just being the middle guy. I was setting up meetings so that he could talk to the school district. But as an EDC guy, I really wasn't doing anything. I thought, okay, I recruited the company, you know, they're here, they're gonna employ, my job was done. Well, no, it wasn't. I had to help him prepare the bench. And it got me to think again, back to getting back to basics. And so what I started doing is, I started a program called Ruby Red Ventures there at the Mission EDC that supports small business. It's basically like Shark Tank. As we're teaching these people how to start a business, run a business, I started to find out that none of those entities that were going through the program were incorporating technology into their business. So I thought, okay, if I don't start to teach folks about technology, then this problem is always going to continue. And what he wanted, what the guy in Royal wanted was, when he said prepare my bench, I need people with transferable skills, with technical skills, critical skills. That's what I need. I don't need a guy with an engineering degree. I need a guy that can help me, that can be a self-starter, critical thinker, you know, things like that. The soft skills that we sometimes forget about how important they are. And so So we create this program after Ruby Red called Code the Town, where I said we're going to try to teach coding to the entire town. And coding at the time was a really cool subject, so we thought, okay, let's focus on coding. We ended up teaching about 3,000 elementary students, and then I realized that as we trained all these students that went through the program, I realized that my program was limited from K through 6. And I got all these kids excited about technology, but as they got to 7th grade, there was nothing there. I didn't create a sustainable program that could continue teaching them, because at the end I'm doing this to get this guy the bench. And his plant manager says, you know, when I told him what was happening, he says, I said, look, I can't, I'm not gonna be able to do this. Plus, by the time these kids get out of high school, you know, they're not gonna be interested in going to work. And he says, Alex, I came here 10 years ago, and that was still the case. So if somebody didn't start doing it, at one point, when am I gonna have my bench, right? And so we started focusing on technology, and then that led to us saying, you know what, we need to train the adults, right? We need to train more people. And luckily, our very good friend, Julian Alvarez, gets appointed to the Workforce Commission. Now, I'd been working with the Workforce Commission for many, many years. I knew the commissioners well before Julian, and I said, I want to apply for a high demand skills grant, and I want to focus on computer programming. And they said, well, Alex, those aren't high demand skills in your region. And I said, well, how do you define high demand? Well, he says, the way we define it is by looking at the jobs that are out there that are in high demand in your region, and then you apply for a grant to help get the skills to fill those jobs. I said, well, the jobs in my region that are currently available are retail jobs, so you want me to teach retail to the folks? You'll give me a grant for that? But how does that solve the issue of developing skills so I can recruit higher paying jobs, right? Because if I keep doing what they were asking, we'd stay in the poverty the way we've always been, right? And we had to raise the limit or raise the expertise of folks so we could be able to recruit higher paying companies. Again, going back to what he said, preparing my bench. Well, that led me to, after Code the Town, that led me to start seeing that the kids, I was doing a disservice by getting them excited to technology. They get to junior high and high school, there's nothing really there, and then I started to find out that under House Bill 5, computer science can count as an elective, right? It count as an elective. Well, I started thinking about myself as a high school student at Hannah High School in Brownsville, and I remembered that all I wanted to do was graduate high school, right? I had no aspiration to go to college. And so I took all the easy electives. I took Spanish, because I knew I could get an A. And so I started thinking, who in the world is gonna take a hard elective, right? And if I have to prepare the bench, and if I gotta recruit companies based on these folks, the folks that are gonna stay here need to have the skills that I need to be able to recruit the companies. And if those kids that choose to stay here and not go to college are gonna take Spanish as the elective, well then, I'm not really doing anything. So we introduced House Bill 728 with the help of Bobby Guerra to change the way that the state, TEA looks at computer science. And luckily it got passed. It took 2 sessions, but we got it passed. And so now, computer science counts as your third math or your third science, or your fourth math or your fourth science. And so, you get your 4 maths and your 4 sciences, and then instead of taking calculus 6, right, you can take computer science course if you like. Now, a lot of these kids that are interested in computer science or technology end up learning through YouTube, right? And so I wanted those kids to be incentivized to take these computer science courses, because it's going to allow me to recruit companies. Now, let me leave you guys with this last thing. Okay, well, she just changed the time code on me. All right, I'll go back. But I will leave you with this. So again, economic development is definitely a team effort, right? At the bank now, I get to work with communities, as I mentioned, throughout the state of Texas. And the way I ended up at the bank is I was city manager of Pharr before I joined the bank. So this building is very familiar to me. And I did spend 10 years at Mission EDC. But the bank decided to take a community approach to banking. And you hear that very often. But they said, we're interested in starting an economic development department. And here's how funny how life works. The guys that used to be my board in the EDC at Harlingen, the first guys to ever give me an opportunity to get into economic development, 12 years later, decided to start a bank. That bank is Texas Regional Bank. And so I had a history with them. They said, we're going to create a position. We can't think of anybody else. We want you to help communities grow. Because if they grow, we grow. And so now I'm tasked with literally traveling the entire state of Texas, because we are growing throughout the state of Texas, and I get to work with communities all over. And so I'm working with Dallas Community College about creating a program that allows us to create more folks interested in banking. I'm working with Bulverde, which is just north of San Antonio. They've got an ESD, which is an emergency service district. They're trying to train more EMTs. Fort Bend and Harris County, they're also trying to train more EMT folks. And so I get to see the way the state works, which is really neat to me, because I get to see what gets a community from 1 to 2 to 3, right? But then I get to go back to the communities in 1, and I get to tell them, look what I learned from the communities in 3 that they did that you could be doing. Now, oftentimes small communities, what they'll say is, well, I'm too small, right? I'm never gonna get to Houston. Well, that's false. You will. Because the state of Texas is going to continue growing. Whether we like it or not, it will grow. And we have to set that foundation. And economic development and everything that you guys are doing all aligns very well. And that's the only way you can get a community from going from 1 to 2 to 3. So with that, I'll leave it for any questions that you guys may have. I know you have a time constraint, so I won't be offended if you don't ask any questions. Yes, sir.
So, in the Rio Grande Valley, you don't have one metropolitan area, like in Austin, Houston, something.
Right.
You've got multiple cities. How do you think about that regionally? And are there different parts of the valley that are excelling in different areas? So, for X industry, you go here, or wine, you do there. How do you think about it across the 4 campuses?
So, technically, right, the census reads us as we got the 2 MSAs, but really, we function like one MSA, right? We function like one metropolitan. EDCs work very well together despite what people think. EDCs by nature are very competitive, but we're competing against other regions, right? When we go to Austin, we sell it as one region. When we go to DC, we sell it as one region. And so yes, technically, we're 2 MSAs, but we do work and we do function as a 4 county-wide MSA. And we've got multiple entities that do that very well. And it's just about supporting them. You will get into competition, right? You will get into communities that compete against one another. But in the end, I learned this thing a long time ago. When I first got into economic development, I went to a conference in Dallas. And it was a conference I had a free ticket on Southwest Airlines. And my boss at the time tells me, hey, go to a conference, just go somewhere, use the ticket. And so I did. I went to Dallas, and I walk into this conference called the North Texas Commercial Association of Realtors. So I get there, and the guy that sees me was one of the EDCs from the Dallas area, and he says, hey Alex, what are you doing here? You're South Texas, you're not North Texas. And I said, hey, I came to learn from you guys. You guys are the big boys, I came to learn from you guys. So he says, you want to learn? He says, walk around this conference, come back and tell me what you see, right? So I did. I walked around the conference, and I came back, and he says, what did you see? And he says, and before I could even answer, he says, what you saw is what you guys need to do in the Rio Grande Valley, and if you did that, you guys would be better than us. And so he says, what'd you see? And I tell him, I saw that every single booth in that conference was 2 cities. Was Dallas-Fort Worth, Las Colinas, Irving, South Lake, Frisco. There was not Dallas, Frisco, Irving. It was 2 cities working together. He says, here's how we do it up here. He says, we get together as a region. We go recruit companies as a region. Once we've locked them to the region, once we've got them committed to the region, then we turn around and we stab each other in the back, and we get them to come to our town, right? The problem with us, he says, you guys stab each other in the back before they even get locked into your region, right? And that's the truth. That was the truth, right? There's multiple examples of that. And so I think throughout the years, you can honestly see now that we're thinking like a region, right? We are working like a region. You know, the partnership has a slogan that's one region, one voice. I was telling one of the folks out there that I think that we're truly acting like a region now. We're truly using one voice, which I think we need to do. We did it with the university, with the merger of the university. We did it with the merger of the MPOs, the Metropolitan Planning Organizations, because we were competing against ourselves in Austin, and we were competing against ourselves in DC, and now we get to compete and we get to sit at the table with a bigger region. So I think now we're moving to that in that direction. Yes, sir.
So, and I love the fact that you cite Porter, you talk about the Brookings Institute. If you look at the economic development that comes from those stage threes, it's all about innovation districts.
Yep.
How do we do that as a region? How do we economize and get innovation districts here?
Well, we have to build density, right? We have to build density. And I think the academic institution, the ISDs, right, play a huge role in that. I mean, we've heard it time and time today, right? As much as we want to talk about getting degrees, right? You know, now it's about getting skills, right? We got to get those stackable credentials. We have to get those because companies are about efficiency, right? If we recruit a company and they need parts that they need to produce, and their client's not going to wait, right? And if we can hire those people, then they can produce that part. Now, the problem that the Valley's always had is that for years, right? And again, going through the stages, there was no fault of anybody, but for years, we talked about how the Valley was competitive, and its one competitive advantage was a low cost or low wages, right? Well, low wages translates to low education. It just does, right? It does. And so how can we go for 30, 40 years talking about how we have low wages and all of a sudden say, hey, we're high wages. We're going to recruit. Never mind everything we said. We're going to recruit the highest wages, the companies with the most innovation. Well, we can't, right? We can't do a 180 shift. We have to start building that foundation. And I truly believe that the way the institutions are going, we are focusing more on innovation. And those are the things that excites me, and that's the reason why I say that I still see the Valley as a startup, because we went from an early seed stage, right, to now the venture capital stage, and then eventually we'll end up on that third innovation-driven stage, but we have to start building that foundation, and I think we're doing it. Yes, sir.
So Alex, the one thing that I see kind of on EDCs and all that I think there's been some starting of that, and you were part of that and everything, but I think it would be a lot better. So I think the mentality is so heavy weighted to recruit.
Yep.
And not weighted enough, like we have, so you're 1, 2, 3, we have little mom and pop businesses that could become bigger.
Yep.
We have middle size that could become bigger. And we said, we spend so much energy thinking that great companies are somewhere else, we need to bring them here, instead of understanding that the potential to build great companies is right here. And so I wish the EDCs had a formula where this much of our attention is gonna be, we need to recruit some, but this much is gonna be that we've gotta build our own with our own great people.
And that's an excellent point, Dr. King, because you're absolutely right. I mean, and you know, I talked about the Metropolitan Revolution, how it talks about, you know, getting back to basics. That's exactly that, right? We have to get back to basics. We have to invest in the community because, you know, Ruby Red Ventures, when we did that, I did that because I didn't have anything else. I couldn't promote land to recruit companies to do what you're saying, right? Because the land was involved in a lawsuit. It was tied in a lawsuit. So I had to create a fund to help the local businesses get started. And so there's a lady that you guys have probably heard me talk or have heard her talk, Pilar Gonzalez. She has a dip that she created, right? And when we started Ruby Red, she came to us and she said, hey, look, I make a dip in my house and I want to be able to sell it, but I don't have the machines to mix it and all these things. So the most you can get from our grant was $20,000. So anyway, she applies, just like Shark Tank, goes through the interview process, presents to the judges, gets selected, top winner gets $20,000. She gets the $20,000, buys the machine, starts producing more product, gets into HEB. Now she's in every single HEB in the state of Texas. She's in Mexico, she's here, she's getting ready to go into the Midwest. And guess what? Her base is never gonna leave the city of Mission, right? Now she may expand to another city, but her base is never gonna leave. Now she has a manufacturing plant. She's packaging products for other entities that are in the food business the way she was. And she's expanding, she's got employees. And so to your point, Dr. King, we have to focus on what they call economic gardening, right? You got to focus on that, on building that foundation if we want to go to the next level, right? And Robert, I'm sorry.
Yeah, Alex, you talked a little bit about your story of growing up and wanting to get out as fast as you could, and then ultimately finding your way back here. As we think about the rising level of education of our youth today, who are going to have a lot more options than they've ever had before, and the reality that most of our graduates here go to one of our local IHGs, what do you think is the role of business for those young men and women that go up north, out of state, somewhere else, as their next step after 12th grade, and sort of getting them back here to bring that innovation and that cross-pollination from seeing communities across the state or across the world?
So, I know in economic development we talk a lot about brain drain, right? We talk a lot about brain drain. I'm not against brain drain, because I'd be a hypocrite if I said I was against that. I left, right, and I came back. But I think, you know, one of the things that I've learned, at least I learned while sitting on the board of TSTC, is that we track our students, right? And I think ISDs, I know you guys track them, right? But we need to start tracking them and letting them go, right? I mean, if they want to go to New York City, hey, let them go, right? Let's hope they come back and they bring that knowledge. I'll never forget when I came back and I was working at that accounting firm. You know, there was no value I can add, but I remember I started working, and this is a long time ago, but I started working at the company, and I said, hey, do you guys have Excel? And they were like, what? I'm like, we've never heard. I had to get the IT guy to literally get me a pirated version of Excel so I can use it, and because my boss wanted me to type everything out or work everything out on a calculator, tear the tape off, staple it to the, you know, and that's just the way he was. He was so accustomed to that, right? And then here I am with an Excel spreadsheet that I could just put a formula to it and total everything in 5 minutes versus his, 3 days worth of work, right? And so, and I don't know if he was doing that strategically to bill the client more, but I just saved the client a ton of money. But I think if we can track them, Robert, and I think if we can track them, I think if we can do a good job about letting them know of the opportunities that exist, right? Because, I love when I hear about stories about people that went, right, and they left from the valley and came back, right? Or the fact that they're still outside of the valley and are being very productive. I like those stories, right? I have nothing against them leaving and coming. My brother left and has never come back, right? In fact, one time he came back to pick up my mom, and he's parked outside my mom's house, right? And he said, he calls me and he says, hey man, I didn't realize we grew up in the hood. And I said, what? I said, we did, but, right? But he was coming from Miami, right? I mean, he was like living the life as a doctor in Miami, and so now we're like at a very different standard. But he's never coming back, right? But I'm still excited that he's a successful doctor, right? And so those are neat stories, because at the end of the day, right? At the end of the day, we need those success stories. We really do. I mean, for many, many years, the Valley was known as being poor and uneducated. That has to change, right? That has to change. That perception has to change. Now, we played a role in that perception by talking about the low wages, by talking about all these different things, because it made a good story for us, right? It allowed us to access grants. It allowed us to access monies. But that story is no longer the case, right? We got a highway system, we got a strong university, we got healthcare, we got all those things that we would need in a growing region. So that excuse doesn't work anymore. And I think now we need to start acting like we do. Yes, sir. Thank you.